there are literally hundreds of ways that we could potentially think about fabricating this pig. And so the work we do at National Pork Board every day is pretty unique in our role as a checkoff. So as a checkoff, very specifically, we work in research, we work in promotion, we work in education. So when you think about promotion, you think about many of the things that you see in the tent where you're going to come have a beer with us later, those of you who are old enough, around what we do in the Taste What Pork Can Do campaign. You'll notice when you come into the tent this afternoon, you'll see a lot of Spanish written in there, and the focus that we have also on the multicultural audience, which is the fastest growing audience here in the United States, and the opportunities that we have to celebrate culture and authenticity. And the reason I slow down and say culture and authenticity is because, in my opinion, as a pork advocate, but also as a meat scientist, if you go around the world, pork is still one of the most culturally authentic proteins that exist. So if you go to Patrick Fleming, who has worked on our team for the last several years, always says this statement that I really like. He says, you cannot have authentic Mexican without pork in the dish. Anybody agree? El Pastor, right? Think about carnitas. You cannot have authentic Chinese without pork in the dish. You cannot have authentic Italian and not think about having pork in a dish, whether that is a cured prosciutto ham, right? That is a salami, it's something that's dry cured, or it's potentially something like pork in a meatball. So as we think about breaking this and we think about our role, one of the things that we do every single day is we work with our producers, we work with our packer processors, the people who are actually fabricating these pigs every day. We work with people who are distributing, so we think about importers, exporters, how we work with our partners at NPPC. Lori mentioned earlier she was president of that board. The easiest way to describe the difference between the two organizations when it comes to global trade is NPPC really works on getting market access, the policy side, the politics side. When I explain this to my kids, I would say, NPPC, you know, they go up to the door and they knock on the door and they try to get in. That door may be the Philippines. That door may be our largest trading partner, which is Mexico. It could be Colombia. It could be anywhere in Southeast Asia. And then either once they open the door or they kick the door down, they go to the next locked door, and in walks the National Pork Board with our partners at the U.S. Meat Export Federation, and we then start moving into something where we can start talking about moving volume and tonnage, okay? So to put that in perspective, in 2025, we moved 8 billion pounds of U.S. pork into international markets beyond our border. So that means we also have 20 billion pounds to consume domestically. So if I were doing this break and we were in Mexico, or I was doing this break and we were in the Philippines or somewhere else, we would actually be breaking this carcass in different parts and pieces. So what we're going to do today, though, is we're going to start with something that looks a lot like what you see up here on the chart, where you actually have the primals. And I have said for years, I don't have a tattoo, but if I ever get one, this is how dedicated I am. It's going to be some version of that, okay? Right here. You know, that's like the cool thing to do now, I think, so on Instagram or something. And would I be trendy? No, Jamie? Okay, so as we go through this, what we're going to do today, though, is Lori, when we first started talking about this in Mark, is we started to say, okay, as we go through this carcass, let's think beyond the loin. You saw that title. And what this really is, and so for those of you in the room who already know how to fabricate pigs, you may see me do some things today to this carcass that you might even call sacrilegious, Aaron, right? All right, so something where I'm totally going to look at this from a different standpoint. We're first going to break it into what I'll call the common primals, okay? That's what you see up here. And just think about this perspective and how many percentage of the carcass each one of these represents. And then Neal and I, with Sarah's assistance from the business intelligence side of our team, we're going to kind of start talking about each one of those individually to say, what if we thought about this differently? Okay? So when you look at today's audience, I say this all the time when I'm in front of people, and I say this all the time when I think about the Taste What Pork Can Do campaign. While it is about today's market, this is really about the future consumer of pork. Does that make sense, right? The future consumer. So millennials, Gen Zs, then Gen Alpha, then Gen Beta, right? When we think about these younger consumers and what is driving them. And so when we think about that, one thing we know for sure, right, Sarah, is that the future consumer of pork looks radically different than the past consumer of pork. Not just culturally, right, but in how they consume, in what they consume, in portion size, how they cook it. I will give you all kinds of useless facts to take home with you today, all right? So I'll start with the first one, and sorry, spoiler alert, but I got to talk first, and I'm the boss, right? So I get to say what I want, okay? But here's the first fact, right? There are more air fryers in America than there are coffee makers, right? Now, if you're in the boomer generation, right, or the silent generation, you're like, that's hard to believe. But the rest of you who are younger, you say, that doesn't surprise me. You know why? Because you buy your coffee at Starbucks, right? You think differently about this. But also when you think about this, it's not only how they're cooking it, it's portion size. People are eating less. There are literally hundreds and hundreds of millions of people in the United States and around the world, not around the world, who are on GLP-1s, who are eating smaller portion sizes, but yet who still need really strong protein when we think about it as these cuts. So what I would ask you today is to have an open mind as we go through each one of these, and we're gonna say, here's where we're at when we think about this from a standpoint of where we can start, and potentially, here's an opportunity of where we can go in the future. So, Sarah, I'm going to start breaking this thing apart while you do that.
Sounds good. I was just going to add on, I think one of the things as he does this today, just keep an idea of, if you think about an air fryer that you may have in your home, how many of these cuts would actually fit in that air fryer and provide a quick, easy solution for you or your family? I think that's a huge opportunity for pork as we think about how we show up, whether it's portion size, even time that it takes to cook some of these cuts. How can we make it even that more convenient for consumers and maybe show up a little bit differently than we are today?
Yeah, good. All right, so we're going to start breaking the carcass. I have to say, because sometimes when you start using a meat saw or something, like if you feel faint or like you're going to faint, one or the other, just let your neighbor know, all right? Because we don't want anybody to get hurt. But what I'm going to do, we'll play a little bit of a game as we go along here, too, to say, what would we do with this cut? Right? How would we think about this cut? So I'm just going to start. First, there's something kind of obvious here about this pig that's unique, and that is that this pig has been skinned. Okay, and that just happened to be because of the supplier that we used. Typically, when I do this cut, it would be a skin-on pig. So does skin have value? Absolutely. What's the primary value of skin in the United States from a pig? Chicharrones, right? So think about how much skin it takes to put 5 bags of pork rinds in every gas station in America. And there's way more than that, right? So when you start thinking about the value of skin, certainly some people may lend to think about making boots and gloves and all those things, and that's true, you can, but we use a lot of skin as an edible product. So this pig was skinned already, which does actually make this a little bit faster and easier for me, and this pig weighed as a carcass about 212 pounds, which means this side is about a 106-pound carcass, which means it's pretty consistent with where the industry would be at today. So if you think about a carcass yield standpoint, this pig probably weighed somewhere in that 275 to 80 pound live range when it was harvested, all right? So I knocked out the very first piece, which is a front shank. Some people call this a volcano shank as well. Okay, so this is something that could typically be thought of as either, let's debone this out and make trim out of it, or let's think about using this as a shank item. right? So when we get to the hind shank and we knock it off, we'll talk about terms like ossobuco. Anybody heard of ossobuco before? You can get ossobuco from veal, very common in some Italian dishes, but certainly if you were in Germany and you were going to have an ossobuco, it's going to be from a pork shank, right? Either front or rear. So something that has to be cooked low and slow because of all the different muscles and the heavy connective tissue. And the best way to think about this when you fabricate a carcass is that with only a few exceptions, all carcasses, pork and beef, are priced from tender to tough, okay? The highest priced piece of meat on a pig, right, typically is going to be something around a tenderloin. Think about a tenderloin in beef as well, right? Then you're going to make your way into those larger, denser, tougher cuts. Those are going to be the low and slow, the barbecue. It's almost quite literally the reason barbecue exists is to get rid of those large, cheaper, dense cuts of meat. And then with the exceptions being items like ribs, right? Something that's really specialty and built around a meal occasion. So, Neal, you can come up here, bud, and you can stand very close. It's okay. I'm going to start by knocking off this front shoulder here. Now, what's important in this cut that I did, I mentioned that we could cut this pig many different ways, okay? Where I split this pig was between the 4th and 5th rib. There are very specific cuts that we make when we fabricate carcasses, right? So there is actually something called the Institutional Meat Specifications Chart, super nerdy, you don't need to know. The point of the matter is it's something that all packer processors follow so that if I'm a buyer at a major retailer, when I order a certain number cut from the 400 series, porks is a 400 series, number 400 is a whole pig, okay? If I order that and I order Boston butts, which we're going to pull out here in a minute, or I order picnics or loins or anything else, that I get a consistent size and shape every single time, whether I buy it from one packer over here or one packer over here. So we're going to start with this big front shoulder that I almost really did kind of butcher. So you see what this looks like right here? All right, so on top we've got the loin. Okay, making our way down to a rib, making our way down into a picnic. And on top of that, we have a set of neck bones. And you'll see glands, you'll see the fat right here. Every single piece of this is edible. It's one of the reasons that a pig has such a high carcass yield, by the way. There's this old saying in the pig business. Anybody know it? You can eat everything but the squeal, right? So it's a tremendous marketing opportunity. When you think about this, we would never let this go to waste, right? Because this is the internal fat of the pig that we could render down for lard. That could be used either for human consumption. You've seen in the MAHA strategy right now, the human nutritionists in the back of the room on our team, there's a big push for animal fat versus seed oils, and conversations like that is happening. So the demand for those type of things are going up. But also we can make choice white grease. We can add it into pet foods. We can use it for a variety of things. So definitely has high value, okay?
Quick question.
Yes.
David, and this might be to Sarah. Are we going to be able to outbid biodiesel for that fat?
You remember us not being the policy organization, Mark?
Lori, can you comment?
Question. I don't have the answer to that one either. So,
I don't have an answer for that. But what I can tell you is that there's more value there today than there has been for a very long time, right? When it comes to this, and we're going to have some conversation later about more than that, because we're going to have some conversation about the huge growth opportunity, but actually growth strategy that's happening right now in ground pork. And that need that if we do make different blends of grind, similar to what you see in the beef business, right? If it's an 80-20, that means 80% lean, 20% fat in sausages and everything else. So the truth is there's actually a need for some of that product, right, to get our blend rates where we want them to be, depending on how fat or lean we want the product. So what I'm doing right now is just quickly deboning this carcass, or deboning this Boston butt, all right, so we start getting on here. I don't want to steal all of Neal's thunder here, but
no, you're good. Keep
it's
going.
really interesting because we call it the butt, yet it comes from the front of a pig. And so one of the things that we talk about, and Sarah and our team talks about quite frequently, and really when we say thinking beyond the loin, is also this opportunity to have a conversation to say, do we need to rethink nomenclature? Okay, when I say nomenclature, just the naming cuts. You know, we're big on being very historical, but I mentioned that changing consumer over time. There are some proteins that just have certain names that are just synonymous with them, and they're almost bulletproof, okay? Let me give you an example. A beef ribeye, okay? Everybody knows what a beef ribeye is, right? So why can't you call a pork ribeye a pork ribeye? And the answer is, you can. You can. You can. That is perfectly legal. You can make a label for it. We were doing nomenclature work at the National Pork Board more than 10 years ago on some of these cuts. You can call portions of the loin a porterhouse. You can call them a New York loin. You can call them a center cut chop, of course, but you can also call them a ribeye. So as we think about each one of these cuts, I pulled the neck bones out, and does this have value? Yes, tremendous amount of value. So we send a significant amount of product outside of the United States when it comes to what we call the drop credit in a carcass. So if we think about the offal and variety meats, whether that's neck bones, kidneys, livers, bones, blood, skin, all of the above, we send to all corners of the world, right? Some that are still part of cultural and authentic dishes. There are dishes where pig snout is the primary ingredient. There are dishes where the pork bung, that's the butthole for those of you who need another interpretation. It's the last portion of the intestinal tract of a pig. If you go to parts of Asia, for example, that's still a very culturally, traditionally, and authentic dish, right? So the neck bones, certainly we could use those in a variety of topics. And Neal, do you have something you want to add to that?
No, I was just going to say in a lot of international market, I mean, you'll see these sold at retail just like this, right? For soups, stews. A lot of people like the bone marrow for the flavor, so yeah, these are popular.
Yep. All right, so we're going to jump right in, Neal, into this because we don't want to miss the opportunity to really focus on some of the cuts that we talked about today. All right, so you see here, this is an inspection stamp, just saying this pig was killed under inspection here in Iowa, under federal inspection. So this is a square cut pork shoulder roast, AKA the Boston butt. Now, this is where you become interactive. So what do we do with this? Well, we eat it. Okay. Very good, Kevin. We eat it. All right, so we smoke it. Raise your hand for smoke it. Right? Okay, so we're on the cusp of barbecue season. This is a big time for pork business, right? June 1st, it's like, you know, thank God that the grills come out because that really drives the pork business. It's very seasonal. Right? So we think about this, we do it. So we smoke it. What else do we do with a pork butt? Slice it. We slice it. Are you from Missouri? Nope. Anywhere near Missouri? Nope. Okay, good. Right? We slice it into what? Pork steak. Okay, so I was just totally randomly hoping he was going to say he was from St. Louis.
Yeah, that would work well.
Because a lot of people do claim St. Louis is like the home of the pork steak, okay? I used to teach meat science courses at the University of Missouri, Columbia, and when I would hold this up, I'd say, all right, kids, what is this? What is this? And they'd say, I have no idea. Then I would hold this up, and they would all say, oh, well, that's pork steak. All right, so then I transferred, and I went to North Dakota State University, and I held this up, and I started this one. You say, what's this? And they're like, we have no idea. And I said, what's this? And they're like, it's a pork roast. Yeah, it's just different, right? It doesn't have to be between Mexico and the United States. It can also be between North Dakota and Missouri, right? We all have these culturally authentic dishes, which is no different than the giant barbecue debacle between Carolina barbecue, Kansas City barbecue, and the best, which is Memphis barbecue. All right? So we have this pork shoulder roast right here. So we either slice it or we smoke it. Did we all agree on that? What else can we do with this? Grind it. All right, we can grind it. Very, very good, Dale, right? Anybody in here ever seen the Boston butt burger? The BBB, right? A Boston butt burger. So right now in the U.S., Neal, I got to let you speak to this because this has been a big piece of what you do.
Well, and you know, it started in international markets in Colombia, and I told David last year, I said, we will get somebody in the domestic side of the market to do a Boston butt burger. Kids like saying butt burger, right? Butt burger. People argue with the name, but I will tell you there's a retailer right here in the Midwest, Fairway, we'll use their name, but they started selling that in the end of April, and it's going really well, right? Selling it out of service case. All they're doing is taking boneless butts and grinding them fresh, making patties in store. But when people try it, right, the flavor side of it is simply amazing, right? So it's thinking differently about, I mean, a lot of people you talk to, they're like, I've never heard of a pork burger. Wait, a pork burger, what are you talking about? And I'll elevate that to a Boston butt burger, and we talk about adding value to the producer, which is ultimately what we want to do, and that is the way that we elevate the experience.
Yeah, so I always expect if you're at World Pork Expo, you're going to see a lot of pork fans here, right? Which is why we don't need to be passing out pork samples at World Pork Expo, right? When you think about the promotion work we do, we need to be passing it out where you fish where the fish are in the high, dense population states, but we talk about these items like burgers. So I'm assuming everybody in here is probably, the majority of you have had a pork burger, raise your hand, right? And you think it's awesome, right? Because it is. My kids are here. They're in the row. This is my daughter right here, Ava, right? Claim to fame. Okay, so when you think about burger, right? It's juicy, it's tender, it's flavorful. We know that, right? I started coming to World Pork Expo in 1988. This was my family's vacation. Every year we came to World Pork Expo and collected beech nut gum from the Mormons guys. And then we had a competition to see who could get more pencils and pens. And there were 4 siblings in total, right? So we had this big event. But my dad also always worked at the Big Grill, and they cooked pork patties. And I have heard for the last 30 years, I'll get to your question in one moment. I've heard for 30 years, why can't we get ground pork? Why can't we get ground pork? The reason why, nobody sold it. You couldn't get it, right? You give a pack to your neighbor, and they're like, great, I'm going to go down to Fairway. Don't have it. I'm going to go to Hy-Vee. They don't have it. I'm going to go to Walmart. They don't have it. You know what the good news is? They have it now. Because now we have a minimum. We have 8 major packers who are running ground pork lines, and ground pork is flying, right? We're doing very good in sausage and all these other areas, right, Sarah? But ground pork volume is up big on the year.
Yeah, we saw it as an opportunity. It's been about 6 years, but what we found is that there's a big opportunity offering consumers similar to what they find in others in the grind set fat to lean ratio. And we see those things coming to market, and it's definitely meeting the needs of what consumers are looking for. I think the other thing about ground pork, as David had mentioned, is these global cuisines are exactly what those younger consumers, the Gen Z, the millennials, are looking for. And so ground pork is a great gateway into the fresh pork set to get them more interested in pork, but also ground pork fits into a lot of those global dishes.
When you grind this cut up, what is the % of fat and
Yeah. So the question was, when you grind the Boston butt, when you grind this pork shoulder roast, what's the percentage fat? It's actually one of the biggest reasons that it's so darn good, because that pork shoulder roast has a lot of seam fat in it. You see it, right? This pig's got quite a bit of cover as well. So you're going to get a lot closer to like an 80-20 blend, meaning that when you're going to have 20% fat in this burger's going to be really juicy, right? If you were to take and grind this whole piece versus when I cut this ham off down here, right, something that's got very little seam fat, very little external fat, you're going to have 2 totally different eating experiences, Stan. And to Neal's point, the success with the BBB started in the international space. So we at National Pork Board invest between $8 and $10 million of your money as producers annually with our partners at U.S. Meat Export Federation. And those dollars are used, again, once we walk through that door, how we get market access, to do promotional programs. Just like you see Taste What Pork can do here in the U.S., if you're in Mexico or you're in different parts of the world, you may see the U.S. pork. Sometimes you'll see people in here wearing this U.S. pig, and it looks like a pig with a flag on it. That's actually something that we trademark and brand. The National Pork Board does in countries all around the world labeling U.S. pork. So one of the promotions we started down in Colombia years ago was how do we get more fresh meat products in there? How do we get more frozen items in? But then that has gradually went from offal items, and it has then gone into loins, it has then gone into butts, and then it has then gone into products like the Boston butt burger. This is actually kind of a turning point in the world right now, is that as we continue to become this cultural melting pot here in the United States, we used to just think about hard boundaries. But if you think, for example, about the work we're doing with the Hispanic American audience in the United States, if you were to pull the Hispanic American audience and pull their spending power in the United States, and you were to pool that and create that into one country, they'd be the 5th largest country in the world. Because the GDP spending power of Hispanic Americans is $4.2 trillion a year. And as our agency that we work with on the Hispanic tagline that we have here in the United States will tell you, right? There are more tacos sold in America than there are cheeseburgers. Right, so when you think about this opportunity, it's no longer like, well, this is what we do in the US and that's what they do in Mexico and that's what they do in Colombia. Rather, it's what can we learn from what they're doing in Mexico? What can we learn from what they're doing in Colombia and potentially bring that innovation and those thought processes back here into the US? All right, so, yep.
Oh, I was just curious, like, where's the BBB going to fit in compared to ground pork? When you look at segment of the meat case and that, are we going to see more of it? Will one take over the other, or rising tide's going to lift both boats?
I think it'll raise both boats. There's 2 retailers doing it right now. They're both selling it out of the service case. But one of the retailers also has a mail order platform, and they're going to add it as a frozen item that can be shipped anywhere in the U.S. So it's really that idea. And I will tell you, retailers watch what other retailers are doing. So this thing will continue to grab momentum and steam. Watch that knife. Just missed your foot.
First rule, never catch a falling knife. And I didn't,
Yeah,
so I
that
passed.
was good.
Yeah.
So I think you'll see continued expansion on that. It's just similar with ground pork, right? And I will tell you, ground pork and what we've learned from our other brethren in the grind set is the consumer understands fat to lean ratios, right? So ground pork that's labeled 80-20, or 85-15, or 90-10, those are growing at strong double digits, Sarah, right? And any ground pork that's just, there's still retailers that are cutting product in the back of the store. They're just grinding it, putting it in a tray. Those are all declining because the consumer has a specific dish they want to prepare and they want a specific fat to lean ratio.
Yep.
Yeah, I was also going to add, I think like it's a great opportunity to drive trial with ground pork burgers. You know, we're all aware of them, but I would say the average consumer, there's still household penetration that we can gain. So wherever we can get them as an entry point, I think, as they have a great eating experience, hopefully we'll drive that repeat and continue to drive demand.
Yep.
Maybe you're going to get to this, Neal. Back on the butt, you know, you think about value add type of products, something as old as cottage bacon to something as new as meat sticks. How does the butt fit into that category?
Okay, that's where we're going next.
Perfect.
We didn't plant that, okay? That's where we're going next.
We really
So,
didn't.
By the way, cottage bacon, British bacon. Anybody ever traveled to the UK before in here? Okay, so if you haven't, I'll give you a little lesson. The majority of the world knows 2 types of bacon. They know bacon, and then they know streaky bacon. Okay? Streaky bacon is the bacon you know, right? It's made from this lower end of the belly. We'll talk about this. That's streaky bacon. But if you travel to most other corners of the world, you ask for bacon, the bacon is actually made from the loin with a small piece of the belly, which I still say, and I wish that Brandon Fields was in here today, a fellow meat scientist, because we have had this conversation for years, twice this week, as a matter of fact, to say, why can't we do more with the loin by turning it into bacon? People, right? God bless bacon, right? That deserves an applause. God bless bacon, right? Woo. Yes, okay. So, Mark, to your question, where do we go next? So I'm going to start by doing something quickly with the picnic to kind of give you an idea of how we think about this differently. If this were a beef chuck, which would be the front of a beef animal, and I were fabricating it right now, the most expensive piece I could potentially pull from this chuck outside of a chuck roast or a chuck eye is definitely going to be the brisket, right? So why the brisket? It's the hardest piece of meat on a beef to cook. It is the toughest piece of meat on a beef, but because of competition barbecue and our obsession with doing that, they have driven up the value of brisket to a point that is astronomical. And you only get 2. Okay, so does a pig have a brisket? Yes. Yes. You know, these pigs all pigs are made the same way they were made 10,000 years ago. And as a matter of fact, many cultures around the world have been fabricating pigs for 10,000 years. So the point of the matter is maybe we could think about this a little differently. Now, again, as I said, this doesn't mean this is always easy or practical in a large-scale application. You always have to remember that. If you're running a large plant and you're processing 5, 10, 15, 20,000 pigs a day, which is very common, anytime I touch a knife to this piece of meat, it's going to cost you, the consumer, more money, because I've got to pay someone to stand here and do this, right? But most importantly, I've got to figure out a way to merchandise it as well. I know how to merchandise beef brisket, but by the way, beef brisket was really hard to merchandise 30 years ago. But today it's not, okay? But that's a whole nother story. But if I were gonna pull this, the brisket's actually sitting right here on top, just like it would be on a beef. And I'll just show you, because I already started to seam this guy out. It's really fun because it'll actually look, when I get done with this, if done correctly, I watched some. I usually make a joke right now that says, when I was watching YouTube videos how to do this last night, it looks the same. Anybody ever seen a beef brisket? It's got a flat and it's got a top, right? If you see this looks pretty similar. Imagine that you were looking at sliced brisket, right? So, you know, is it possible to think about it differently? Yes. Will you label that as pork brisket? Okay. What are we going to do with the rest of this picnic? What are we going to do with the rest of this? Hopefully we're going to turn this into ground pork. Okay, or we're going to turn it into something further processed, right? Something like Spam, sausage, brats, whatever else. We have believe me, ground pork is a growing business, and that's huge. But the sausage and further processed business is alive and well. Think about Johnsonville, Hillshire, right? Our obsession with all of these different pieces. So the point of that matter is we need trim. Now, we get a lot of trim from sows. Right? That's our cows of the beef business, how we get more hamburger. We do get that trim, but we still need trim off of these market hogs as well. So a lot of this picnic usually wouldn't be broken down into, say, like beef would be an arm roast. The beef business isn't cutting this into an arm roast anyways. They're trimming it as well because there's the lowest number of cows in the United States as there has been since like 1960. I have an economist in the front row. This is very handy. So Dermot, it's a long time, right? And they grind about 60% of the beef carcass, okay? I do think in the pig business, by the way, we should be a little bit envious of that because the opportunity in ground pork, because if we pull a cut out of anything else and we can take the rest of that and grind it for a profit, that's a big opportunity because I can theoretically turn any one of these pieces into trim or grind. Okay, so Neal, let's start talking about the fun stuff.
Can we get rid of this?
Yeah, for now. Let's get rid of that for now.
The other thing I was going to add, you're starting to see a lot of these sold whole skin on or a portion of this. Because again, it's very popular in multicultural communities, right? So we're starting to see a lot of those sold at retail.
Yes. Oh, sorry. Yes, sir.
As we're talking about this, we probably also need to remember our local lockers.
Yep.
And what the lockers can do for us if we can't find something at a Hy-Vee or a Fairway.
Yep.
We can go to a local locker.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So, I mean, it's a good point. You know, the majority of growth in USDA federal inspected plants is local lockers. I think I just saw some data this week that there were like 150 added plants in the United States, right? The average federally inspected plant in the United States processes 1 pig a day. That's the average. The majority of all pigs in the country are killed by the top 5%, right? The larger packers, but certainly that is the case. Let me give you an example. If you need to find a half pig to cut up at World Pork Expo, sometimes you need to go to a local locker to make it easy, which is exactly what we did. But a small local locker probably can't afford a large scalding tank, which is basically like a hooped up car wash, okay, for a pig that removes all the hair. So instead of that, they skin it. Very common in small local lockers. So you're right. You can always ask your butcher, right, for some of these specialty cuts. And while we've been talking, I've just been separating this into the individual primals. So let's talk a little bit about nomenclature. Let's focus on the front end of this pig here for a minute, and let's just think about this. Neal, I'm going to have you step in and start talking about our fabbing a Copa.
Yeah.
Okay, while I start to maybe explain or their lack thereof in terms of explaining. Do you want to use one of these or one of these?
Yeah, well, it doesn't matter.
Nope, doesn't matter.
So
it's up to you.
who's familiar with Copa?
All right.
So it's life-changing, I will tell you that, right, if you haven't done it. And it's really easy. And what I've always said is, when I joined the pork board, we had chefs on staff, and every time they cooked for the board, they would do the Copa. And I said, you guys got to stop doing this because you can't find it. It's not available anywhere. And now you can find it at Walmart. Kroger's rolling it out nationally. And it dawned on me one day, it's like, it's on every pork butt or every shoulder, right? Watch YouTube videos. I was watching a YouTube video the other day, and a guy goes, well, use a pork butt. And if you can't find that, buy a shoulder. And I'm like, it's the same damn thing. So we confuse the consumer. Do you want me to fabricate out the Copa?
Well, yeah. While you're starting to fab it, I will talk because I'm really good at talking. Okay?
Yeah.
So,
I'm going to use one of
Neal,
these.
you can use one of those. So one of the things that we do at NPB, all of you have seen that book that was put on the table. You don't have to go into this book that says Building a Bigger Appetite for Pork. This is an example of something we do. So AMC is the largest meat conference that's held in the United States every year, the annual meat conference. This was actually a book that we used at the annual meat conference last year, where we were fabricating a pig on stage in front of 2,000 people with the chef that you see there in the book and actually starting to think about this differently. And one of the things that we're really thinking about now and working with our packer processor friends and retailers is, gosh, let's rethink, let's be bold enough to challenge ourselves to say it's okay to cut some of these things differently. And in the spirit of one of my colleagues, Kirsten Hafer, and I'm going to do this, right? And I'm going to say, does anybody think this is going to fit in an air fryer? What does fit well in an air fryer? And I'm not talking about pork. Ava? What fits well in an air fryer? Not pork. Pork doesn't matter. Bacon. Okay, we love bacon in an air fryer. It does, okay? But think about our competing proteins. Neal and I, by law, are not allowed to say that word. This is the reason I was trying to bait this out of you. Okay, so I can't say that word. But do the other proteins have sizable options that will fit into cooking appliances that are applicable for younger consumers? Yes, they do, because consumers have more options now than they have ever had in history. So don't think that they have to choose pork. But if they walk up to the meat case, which, by the way, really hasn't changed much in 50 years, and they see this big giant hunk of meat for their tiny refrigerator, the chances of younger households purchasing this is going down significantly, right, Sarah? So when we think about these cuts, it's not even cool. It's actually almost out of necessity. Now listen, the shoulder market's good. The butt business is good. That's not what we're saying. But is there an opportunity to fabricate some of these things that are different? The Copa is a great example. You can buy the Copa at the world's largest retailer in every single store in America right now, which is very, very, very innovative and is a great opportunity. So let's back up and say, what is the Copa? All right, so in meat, we love to use, let's say love languages, okay? So we use a lot of French on the harvest side of the business because it's more copacetic for people, okay? What is the French word for slaughterhouse? Abattoir. Doesn't that sound good, right? It's the abattoir, right? We could go to rest or we could go to lairage. We could think about all these words, right? Well, a lot of the words too, and if you think about these literally thousands of years of history apply, and when we think about Italian and Spanish, and we think about now the booming business that is charcuterie, 20 years ago when you went to your Aldi, they did not have 30 different kinds of charcuterie items, okay? Today they do. It's a great example of the pork business and the dry cure business and everything else. So Copa literally is it means collar. It's just pulling the collar off of this pig And if you're in competition barbecue and you're a pit master, this is called the money muscle, okay? You're in a competition barbecue, they get down in there, they pull this muscle out because there's a lot of connective tissue that breaks down around it. It's got a lot of really finely dispersed intramuscular fat, which means it's going to cook really evenly and it's going to be delicious because fat equals flavor, right? And they'll pull that one muscle out. But in Spain and in Italy, for 1,000 years, they've been calling that a Copa muscle. And you actually will see when you go into a dry cure business, you'll see Copa actually dry cured. But today, the idea here too, and what we're doing in the US is we're pulling that Copa muscle out and we're serving it like a steak. And when I say like a steak, I do actually mean more like a beef steak because when you cook it, you can cook it like a steak. Salt, seasoning, heat. You don't have to overcook it and you can actually extract that out. What Neal's going to show you is that you can actually go buy one of those big, dense pieces of meat, take it home, even though, you know, most people don't want to do that either, right? But you can actually extract a Copa directly from a Boston butt, and that's what Neal's going to show you.
Yeah, and I'm not a meat scientist, so I mean, there's seams in here where you can go and roll that Copa out.
That's right, nobody's watching.
I've trained my 29-year-old daughter to do that, right? Because during COVID, we started eating a lot of Copa steaks when we were all home during COVID. So now she does it all the time. She sent me a picture the other day and she goes, another pork butt fabricated into steaks. So what I do, literally, it's a simple process. You just come down on this top end, and if you happen to get to the blade bone, then you come back in a little bit. So that's the Copa. This is my archaic way of doing it, right? So now, when you take that and you lay it on the cutting board, look at those beautiful steaks, right? You can go to Fairway here in Des Moines today and buy a bacon wrap. They're calling it a Copa chop. So a 6-ounce chop, and they're wrapping it in bacon. I don't think you need bacon, but I'm telling you, you cook this medium rare, let it set, a little bit of butter on it, it's really good. Let that melt down in it. I mean, it's an amazing cut, and that's how we're adding value, right? Because if we can sell this for $4.99, $5.99 a pound, I will tell you there's a retailer in St. Louis that started doing it at $2.99, went to $3.99, went to $4.99 because they couldn't keep up, right? So there's ways that we can add value versus the retailer that says, man, I just want to do a pork butt ad for 99 cents.
Right.
Because I can move 25 loads. And we're trying to shift that mindset. But that's how easy it is to get a beautiful cut of meat. And our campaign used to be grill it like a steak, right? I think Patrick did that. I mean, that is just an unbelievable cut of meat.
Yeah. So now, when you look at those Copas, right, you think about that, and I ask that question, will this fit in an air fryer? Absolutely, right? When we think about portion too, people are going for smaller portions, right? But this is going to be flavor. This is going to be opportunity. We have talked so much during the launch of the Taste What Pork Can Do campaign, the focus that the National Pork Board has right now on demand. It is imperative and something you have, if you've ever heard me and Neal and Sarah or any of the rest of our staff talk, we always talk about this thing of saying, the time is now. The opportunity is now. It's not accidental that we're talking about comparing this to beef. It's not accidental that we're using words like steak, right? Neal just described a premium pork item, and I would call this a premium pork item, at a very high price, and the highest number you got to was $4.99?
$5.99.
$5.99. You couldn't buy a ribeye in America for $5.99 a pound today, right? Does that seem like a pretty good opportunity? Not disparaging beef, by the way, because this isn't about comparing the slice of the pie. The pie for protein is getting bigger. The pie is getting bigger, right? Our friends in beef have got bigger opportunity, but we have got a bigger opportunity as well because, where's my nutrition team at? You ready? We are the affordable nutrient-dense protein. And I think that's important language to use because this, I promise you, if you go to a retailer, right, if you go to Walmart, which carries this in every Walmart, and you go and you buy a Copa steak and you eat it, I promise you, you will not be disappointed, right? Juicy, tender, flavorful, but also something unique that then, even if someone did want to cook a smaller roast, this is a little easier to work with, okay? And I've worked in the meat business for now 25 years, and wherever I have traveled in the world, no matter where it is, whether it's the Philippines or China or Japan or South America or anywhere else, you go and you ask somebody, hey, what is the number one thing, trader, whoever you are, what is the number one thing I could do being a U.S. producer to make your life easier? And it's not fabricate a Copa or do something else. You know what it always says? Can you put it in a smaller box? You know, and I was literally in Manila, and this guy says, you ever tried to carry 2 60-pound boxes on the back of a moped? And I said, no, I haven't. And he says, well, we do it every day. Millions and millions of pounds, right? And here's the next line that came out of his mouth. And your competitors will cut that butt in half for us, right? So the mentality doesn't have to be that if we don't sell it as one giant chunk of meat, we're not going to sell more. The idea needs to be if we cut it in half, which means we're satisfying our consumer, right? That we might actually sell twice as many. Gene? What's a CT butt? Oh, CT butt. All right, CT butt stands for collar trimmed. So what's that? Salad? I'm sorry? Salad? Well, cellar trim, but it's essentially pulling the collar off of a butt, right? Because what you're doing there, Gene, is you're sizing it down. Right, and you're making it a more copacetic piece. And I don't have well, I still have it. I haven't touched it. We can come back to that here in just a minute. Yeah. So it's just a trimmed butt. Okay. So sizing it down. Now, for time's sake, Neal, I want to move to this loin because this is another piece. Okay. We'll end with the belly because it's the funnest part. All right. So here you've got a whole pork loin. Okay. End to end. This down here is going to be your sirloin end. Okay. This down here is going to be your rib end of the carcass. Now, here's where we have to make a decision is what are we going to do? This is why baby back ribs cost more than spare ribs, all right? Why do baby back ribs cost more than spare ribs? Because if you want bone-in pork chops, okay, that cuts the number of baby back ribs in half. Because the bone and a baby back, or the bone and a bone-in pork chop is the baby back, right? So we pull the spare rib here in a minute. We'll pull the ribs off of that belly. We're going to get a spare rib off every pig, okay? But if we think about that, the next piece also is that baby back ribs fit much easier on a plate than a giant long piece that comes out of a spare rib. So we've got to decide, do we want to turn this into bone-in chops, or do we want to actually fab this thing down? In this case, I'm going to make the decision to fab it down. And the first thing I'm going to pull out, we talked about earlier the way we merchandise pork, pull something out that the nutrition team will love to talk about, which is a pork tenderloin. We mentioned that pricing from tender to tough, and I am just pulling off some of the external fat and pieces here and get into this pork tenderloin. You've all seen this, a lot of success in the United States. You know why? The portion size meets the consumer where they want to be. You see a lot of these in retail that are already pre-flavored, right? A lot of pre-marinated, right? But if you think about if you're only eating for one or you're eating for two and you want to do something simple, you could cook it as a whole roast, or you can do something really easy and you can just pull out medallions. But the tenderloin, right? Do we have a tenderloin issue? We really don't, okay? The reason why we don't have a tenderloin issue, you saw how big that was, right? We only get 2 of these on a pig. I mean, this is a very, very limited piece. When you think about the carcass itself, we're talking less than 1 or 2%, right? That's why we don't really have a tenderloin issue. Yep, you're ahead of me there, tenderloin. But when we think about this now, we're gonna do 2 things. First, we're going to break the sirloin off, and I'm gonna grab the saw right behind you here, Neal. And then we're going to debone this loin, and we're going to talk about a couple of other unique opportunities that might exist for pork here. So first is a pork sirloin. So how many of you, show of hands, have ever had a pork sirloin? I'm not looking yet. Okay, not very many. Okay, so, you know, sirloin's a really interesting business. So this is what a sirloin roast looks like. Looks very similar to, again, anatomically, very, very similar to beef. Okay, I pulled this out. I take and I could slice this into a boneless sirloin steak, right? Really looks pretty good. fairly lean, fairly good portion size for et cetera, right? You're gonna get very few sirloins off of a pig though. At this size, you're gonna get maybe 2 or 3 good steaks. We're not here to talk about the sirloin. We currently don't have a campaign going on or any specific additions with the sirloin itself. We've talked about doing it as like a pocket roast in the past, doing something unique when it comes to the sirloin itself. You will see some in retail, Neal. I don't know how much.
You see some. I mean, you'll see some sirloin roasts and sirloin chops. It is another cut that's certified by the American Heart Association as heart healthy, so.
And what
but
I'm doing,
hard to find.
all right, so next up, quickly, I am pulling out this loin. And I think we're doing fine on time, but I'm just gonna make my way down.
30 minutes.
And I'm going to roll this guy out. So what I'm peeling out right now is, I've pulled out the baby back ribs here and this backbone, which both have value. Now, I don't have a bandsaw with me, so just imagine that I did, and I could run this down. There's your baby backs, right? A lot of value there, of course, when we think about this rib market. I'm gonna pass those off to you. But when Neal and I were talking about this, and whenever we were planning this with Lori and the team, and the title of this is like Thinking Beyond the Loin. There's a bit of an interesting scenario here in the pork business. So when you're in the meat business, right, especially if you're in the beef business, and you start thinking about merchandising and value, we often talk about the highest value cuts coming from the middle meat, right? So if you're in the beef business, you got to think about loins. So that's where you're going to get your New York strip. We got to think about ribs. That's where you're going to get ribeyes for, et cetera, right? For example, anywhere from today, $12.99 to $24.99 a pound. It just depends, right? Then you're going to depend on grade, whether it's select, it's choice, it's prime, right? Those middle meats, they are driving a significant piece of the volume, right, when you think about this from a species standpoint. And so we started by breaking apart those bigger, denser cuts in pork. And in that chart that was on the slide, it talked about this loin being about 16% of the carcass. The reality of our business is that the loin is actually, from a profit center standpoint, is actually the loss leader when we think about a carcass. Okay, so when we think about pulling loins, which are 77% of sales, when we talk about retail, whether it's loins or ribs, we've got a lot of opportunity in this loin to think beyond what it is. And I think all of you would probably agree. Raise your hand if you've had an inconsistent eating experience with a loin in the past. Okay, yeah, sorry, Gene, I just had to throw it out there, right? We've talked about this before, okay? But also, what else can we do with the loin? And so we talked about grind, right? Opportunity and grind. But we could also talk about opportunity for strips, right? Sarah, maybe?
I was just going to add, I think if you look across the meat case, you'll see some of our competitors are adding those steps to just make it that more convenient to consumers. So it may be strips, it may be diced product, it may be, slices, like things that just make it and take it that extra level of convenience. So we make it easier on them.
Okay, all right, good. So we're not going to go into a thing about loin quality or anything else unless you have a question. But what I'm going to show you here is, if I were to take and just roll this out right now, I'd be left with a boneless, skinless loin, right? So we're not going to do that at the moment because I'm going to show you something a little bit different. And the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut off this front 4 or 5 inches of this loin right here. And I'm going to show you, right, something, if we think about what this loin looks like once we get past the 4th and 5th rib and we get here into this part of the loin, you'll notice that looks an awful lot like a ribeye, doesn't it? You know why? Because it is, right? When you look in that handout that was in your seat that we talked about what we use at AMC, this is a ribeye. But just like we started talking about separating muscles in the shoulder, there's also opportunity to separate some of these muscles in the loin complex as well. And again, several examples here. Now, if we knock off the front end of this loin in the U.S. when we fabricate, and we do. And I'll show you why, because in 5 inches of loin, it goes from looking like this, which is the blade, the scapula bone is right in the middle of this, to this, right? Not very appealing or consistent, is it? So how many of you have had a country rib before? Okay. Well, this is what a country rib is, all right? So this is technically, we've boned it out. We could take and we could lay that piece in half, or we could actually talk about peeling off some of these spinalis muscles that are located right here on top of the loin. You see the spinalis? You know what the spinalis is, because if you've eaten a ribeye before, then you know that that really dark muscle, when you eat it, is like the most succulent piece that you eat, right? So when we peel that out, we can start thinking about some of these cuts, and we can start thinking about looking at the carcass and fabricating it a little bit different when we start thinking about the shoulder and the loin. So earlier, Neal talked about the Copa, and you'll see some of these prepackaged products that are here. There's a package of the Copa steaks right here. We love our visuals, and if we don't cut them out of the bag, we get to take them home and eat them, so we're not cutting this out of the bag. Thank you, Brian. The proof here to say this is that Neal and I didn't package this back at the National Pork Board. Like, there are packer processors right now in the U.S. who are taking advantage of the innovation opportunity to think differently, right? To think about this Copa, to think about the opportunity to turn it into steaks, to think about the opportunity to turn it into a roast, but also to rethink this loin complex a little bit and start to actually think about separating out some of these cuts. And so I'll give you another example of a cut, right? There's the Pluma. The Pluma, that's right here. This is what a Pluma looks like. It's really nice whenever it's just separated out as an individual muscle and it's vacuum sealed, all right? So the Pluma is actually another word, right? It's Spanish for feather. Because when you actually separate this out and it comes from the shoulder end of the loin, without damaging this loin, we can actually peel the top portion of the rib end off, and we can get this really nice portion here known as a Pluma, right, which actually kind of has an attractive name, right, when you think about something being Spanish or something being Italian. But again, an item just like that rib end of a ribeye that I talked about, that succulent, almost steak-like eating experience, something that you can simply season and then throw on a grill or add something to high heat and pull it back off and eat it like a steak. You know, to me, it's almost shaped a little bit like a flank steak or something else. But here again is an example of a cut that traditionally we have never taken off the carcass. Right? We've never fabricated a Pluma off the carcass. We've never fabricated, there's also another cut, it's called the pressa, and it comes from the upper shoulder, right? You can buy a pressa if you go to Spain. You can buy a pressa if you go to Italy. You cannot buy a pressa if you go to the United States, right? And unfortunately, unless your butcher happens to be an old Spanish butcher or an old Italian butcher, he probably isn't, or she isn't going to know how to fabricate it either. But the idea is that it's okay to think differently. Right? Because if it meets them where we want to be on portion size, and it meets them where we want to be on taste and flavor, right? Think juicy, tender, flavorful. That's what consumers are looking for. Then we have a great opportunity. There's another one that if we get time, I'll show you. It's on that piece that Neal's leaning up to, and it's called the Secretto. Anybody ever heard of a Secretto? Just think about the word, right? So it literally is like, it's like a secret muscle. Right? And it's actually tucked in behind the spare ribs and the belly. But the reality is with the Secretto, what we do with it in the U.S., we just trim it. We just put it in grind. We don't have to devalue any cut to get there. We could pull it off if we slowed down and we took the time to peel it out. But again, just because we pull it out and it looks cool, just because we pull it out and we have a fun eating experience with it, there is a tremendous amount of work that we have to consider around merchandising, right? Of actually putting a marketing plan together and think about merchandising this product. So when we think about pulling out that individual piece from a standpoint of, can we think about this different, we can pull out and say, I'll give you another example of this, is this piece right here on top of the country rib that I pulled out is actually a part of that Pluma, okay? So I had to devalue it because I only had one half to work with here, but I'll show you an example. if I were to seam this out, I get a couple of really big advantages, all right? The first advantage is that I debone it, because there's a little bitty piece of the scapula that's still in there. Anybody ever on a meats judging team here other than, yes, okay. So the winners of the meats judging team, if meat judging were basketball and free throws win games, specs win meat contests. So they put a piece of meat out. It's the geekiest thing you've ever seen. They put a piece of meat out and you walk up to it and you go, I know what's wrong with it. And if they don't remove the bone, right, because nobody wants to eat bone at home, if they don't remove the bone, then it's out of spec, and you have to know those kind of things. So the consumer doesn't want to buy this because the bone weighs and it costs money. So when they pull it out, this is actually a portion of what we would get in that Pluma muscle. And it's going to be really, you see how marbled it's going to be? It's streaky, it's marbly, it's marbling, it's going to meet it. But I'm also paring it down into a portion size that works really well to make some additional near Copa steaks, but they're actually more like a country rib steak. And you see how that portion size gets smaller now? That's going to match what consumers are looking for. You're going to have some of those heavier, darker muscles. And I'll give you an example, because these two there's two of them in this package right here, right? This is actually another commercially available, we ordered these, right? Available piece that are these small little Copa steaks or country rib steaks that you can pull off that match really well. All of this has the ability to be merchandised up and thought about differently, right? It's not about saying, hey, this is the way we have to do it moving forward, but it's saying we certainly can do it differently than just doing what I'm about to do, which is what we do in the business here in the US. We're going to roll this boneless loin out, just like I'm doing. This is, oh, I've only got one more knife to drop, so that one needs to stay up here with me. I'm actually just peeling this down. And if you've ever been to a retailer before, especially if you've been to a box retailer like Costco or Sam's Club, and you go back to the pork section, I'm starting to make this thing look very friendly to something you've seen many, many times before. And I'm taking this down to less than an 1/8 inch trim to get just a large boneless loin, right? Now we all are familiar with this. But you remember what I said? If this were beef, this would be 3 different cuts. Merchandised 3 different ways. If we don't know what to do with it, you know what we call it?
Pork chop.
Super creative. Assorted chops. Anybody ever seen those before? I wish Patrick was here. He would love it, right? Here's what we also know, though. This experience from this end to this end, because this is more of a New York, this is getting closer to what a center cut chop looks like. They actually can and do eat a little bit differently, because pigs don't get fat evenly either. Right? They get fat from one end to another. All pigs have 3 layers of fat for the swine nutritionists and everybody else in the room here, right? So the way these things work from a metabolic side or the physiology of muscle, it's not a point to say that I'm displeased with the loin, by the way, just for the record. But I do think that it's an opportunity for improvement, right? As we continue to think about merchandising this product, we have an opportunity to actually go up. Now, you remember what I said? We typically roll this out. There's no steak cut that can be had here. Would everybody agree with that? But you remember that Secretto I talked about? This is it. It's hidden in there. And if I would have cut that rib just a little bit longer, and I took my knife now, I'll show you something if I don't cut myself in the process of doing it. And I actually pull this out and skin it down. And I pull this muscle back just a little bit here. I'll show you what this looks like. It's shaped kind of like a I know that baby needs to see a pork carcass fab now, okay? So, you see that? This is that Secretto. You see all the marbling that's tucked in there? This thing was literally laying in there underneath the belly, laying in underneath the ribs and everything else. It's an opportunity cut to start thinking about a little bit differently. So, hey, Jamie Burns, what's the time check?
Should start wrapping
Oh,
up.
perfect, good. All right, that's good, because we're right on time. Okay. Yep, absolutely.
Are the majority of these cuts brined?
Okay, the question is, are the majority of these cuts brine? The answer, no. No, they are not. So all those unique cuts, think about the Copa, the Secretto, the Pluma, et cetera, no need to brine. And the biggest reason there's no need to brine those is because they were muscles of locomotion, right? So meaning that the darker a muscle is, by the way, the more ability it has to bind water. There's a meat component here that involves pH and all kinds of stuff. But the idea is that as you cook that and break it down, there's no need to brine it. You can brine it, it's great, because you're going to add a little flavor from salt. Anytime you add salt, water, and phosphate, right, maybe even a little sugar, you can add a little weight, right? You can certainly do something to maybe improve the taste profile, but there's no need to brine it. Now, we brine lots of loins in the U.S. We enhance, we call that enhancement, so we can use needle injection, we can brine it, we can do a variety of things to make some of these different, but by and large, all those cuts from the shoulder, no brining.
Is the trend going away from enhanced?
The question was, is the trend going away from enhanced? And I will say, yes. In the fresh meat case, the trend went away from enhanced about, wow, time flies, 12 years ago. If you go back to 2012, 2018, the percentage of what we would call enhanced product in the case was about 80%. Okay, today it's less than 20. So yes, and that followed a lot of different trends, by the way. Clean labeling, less salt, less complicated labels. There was a consumer trend towards that. So yeah, the trend has started to go away. All right, and as I'm doing this, right, we can wrap for doing more questions. I didn't want to also discount this big hunk of meat right here, right? Because we haven't even gotten to the ham, which, by the way, we weren't intending to break. We don't have other ham muscles to show you, but to say, what do we do with the ham here in the U.S.?
Ship it to Mexico.
All right, it's two things. Yeah, when we don't know what to do, we ship it to Mexico, is what Neal said. So Mexico is 40% of our total export volume. They're our largest trading partner by a landslide, right, Dermot? And this is a huge component of the business that we do down in Mexico. But that ham also still does have great opportunity. Because what you can do with this ham, too, potentially, I will tell you my own personal bias is to say we have not fully capitalized on the opportunity that exists in the shoulder, okay? But as we think through that shoulder and we think through that loin, we have a tremendous amount of opportunity because this is the largest, densest cut on the pig. It's the majority of said pig. And if you start to think about separating those muscles out, much like what we do with beef, you can turn it into an inside round, an outside round, and an eye of round, and still have some trim and an ossobuco shank. I still say the ham has a lot of opportunity, my own personal bias, for jerky, because the jerky market's doing well, right? As people think about snacking on the go, you need something that's lean that you can make that's dense. Certainly there's a big opportunity for grind when we think about the ham, because again, this is a big, dense item that we think about. Who's got another question? Yes, sir.
All pork's not the same. Is there any look, like we want to do all these different cuts as far as trying to expand the different options out there for people? Is there any looking at doing a grading system, knowing that there's bad pork and there's good pork, just like there is in beef? Like there's different ranges, and customers want to know this is a good piece of meat, this is a poor piece of meat. You can pay your few dollars for this. You're paying more money for a good piece of meat. Is there anything doing that? Because again, we want to strengthen our domestic market, even though export's great, but that can go away at a flash of a moment like we saw with China 8 years ago.
Mm-hmm. All right, so the question is what about a grading system? And I would need 3 more hours that I'm not going to get, but here's what I will tell you. Is there a pork grading system in the United States? No, there is not. Okay, we actually don't have a grading system, things like Choice Prime. That doesn't exist in the current system that we have today. So I would phrase this a little bit differently. And I've thought about this a lot because I worked a lot in the area of research of pork quality for the last 20 years. And when I think about quality and grading, things get complicated really quickly. One, because people define quality very, very differently, right? There are parts of the world where quality is defined by freshness. There are parts of the world, like safe to eat. There's people who qualify and quantify quality as higher marbled. There's people who qualify quality as more marbling, as darker in color. There's something really important is that the same factors that significantly drive grading in beef and factors are not the same in pork. Okay, they're not the same. So if you get just higher marbling, it won't be the same, right? And I'm using scientific data to back this statement up. But what I would say is I do think we should always have on our mind, I'm starting to define quality differently. And the way I say it today is it's about the consumer eating experience. Anything we can do to improve the consumer eating experience is going to be better for us. Could that potentially result in a company, because it wouldn't be the National Pork Board, by the way, doing a grading system, it would be the industry. The industry would decide that they wanted to do it. That happened in the beef business 45 years ago, and it took them 45 years to get to where they are today, which is with a pretty incredible demand model that they currently have, especially when supplies are constrained. But I think there's an opportunity throughout the whole carcass to improve the eating consistency and eating quality for consumer.
Because we see on a year over, just looking, beef is $20 more per hundredweight, whereas pork is $6 less
Yep.
over a year.
Yep.
And just, again, with beef, there's just ongoing demand. You cannot kill beef.
Right.
There's doing something to increase pork demand.
There's something to be said about that, right? If we want to capture the long-term consumer of pork, we're going to have to capture them with a consistent, long-term, great eating experience, right? And I say that we're not necessarily taking advantage of some of the opportunities that are staring us in the face, quite literally every single day. That whole title, Think Beyond the Pork Chop, very important, right? We have an opportunity where there's not a quality problem here, right? There's not a quality problem here. There's not a quality problem in that belly. Really, if we want to talk quality and we want to get specific, we're going to narrow it all back down to that loin, right?
We
Two
got
more
time
questions.
for
Yep.
two more
Yeah.
questions. Yep.
Right over here.
You mentioned meat sticks briefly. What is being done, or is there an option for pork meat sticks out there? Is ham the ham portion the only place to go for that, or?
So the question is about meat sticks, jerky, I mentioned that,
Yeah,
right? The
maybe that's what
opportunity
you
there.
mentioned.
I'll be honest with you, I don't know much about the opportunity in terms of the value of the numbers that are there. You know, Sarah, I don't know if we have data on that, but what I would definitely say is, like this C-store business, the convenience store business is booming, right? And snacking on the go, because convenience stores are so much better than they used to be, right? I used to say, never trust the egg salad sandwich 20 years ago, right? Okay? Today, there are more and more people eating on the go. You can buy fresh pork in half of the gas stations in Iowa. Literally, you can buy medallions. Fresh.
If you could put bacon into a meat stick, that would be a good thing.
I like where your head is going with this, right? I think there's opportunity in that space because our nutrition team will tell you, people want more protein, but they want it convenient and they want it shelf stable. That matches everything your dream is there in a perishable business.
How much definable difference is there in the U.S. pork supply when you're talking about quality? In other words, this carcass isn't nearly as good as this carcass.
Wow. Okay. What a question to end on.
Oh,
So the question is how much variation is there in quality? Okay. So I have good news here, all right, because I have measured this for the bulk of my career. We have a more consistent supply of higher quality pigs than we've ever had. Pigs are more consistent, right? I mean, look around this room. Think about the supply that we have, the volume of pigs. We have a very consistent supply. So if I were giving this lecture 10 years ago and I wanted to find pale, soft, exudated pork, PSE pork, that's the bad pork, okay? And I wanted to find RFN, red, firm, normal, that's what this is. And I wanted to find DFD, dark, firm, and dry. That's also kind of bad pork, okay? If I wanted to find that 10 years ago, I literally, if I were coming here to Expo from the airport to here, Nick, I'd just drive to 2 stores. I could find all 3 kinds. I could walk in, and it was like my hook for the audience because I said, I didn't bring this with me. I bought it today. I can't do that anymore because the consistency has improved. Now, is there inconsistency at times in a store in color, marbling, et cetera? Yeah, sure there is. You can see it that's there. But we're more consistent than we have probably ever been as an industry. And that's pretty straightforward because you know why? We have a much smaller, more homogeneous set of genetics. And we have a much more consistent feeding strategy. So the bulk of all pigs in the world are fed and bred fairly similarly when we think about the business, which has met it. But to the gentleman's point earlier, it doesn't mean there is an opportunity. I will tell you this, though. There's more brands today chasing cuts, chasing nomenclature, chasing opportunities for premium than there has been in a long time because it's not just the pork board that's seeing the opportunity for growth. It's the whole business. And that, to me, is very, very encouraging from the seat I sit in on behalf of the producers I represent to say, I think we got a heck of a good opportunity moving forward. So, Lori, thank you for the opportunity.
I just want to, first of all, a round of applause for, So, I mean, I want to thank Neal, David, Sarah, and Jamie for all the work they did. Our goal was just to show you that that it's more than pork chops. Mark and I talk, and he knows that that's the theme for me. So hopefully you guys have seen this, you're inspired. You all go buy Copa steaks or whatever you need to do. And we as Alltech certainly appreciate all of you taking time to be here, the seminar. Enjoy the show. If you're hungry and need a beverage, the Alltech tent is out to the east side there. The number escapes me. I don't, EV420. Look for the Alltech flags.
Free beer and
free
pork.
beer and beverages.
Hey
like,
now.
it's a beautiful day. We are celebrating the best product. Enjoy it. Thank you.